Hi everyone, I'm here with Jenny to do a kind of pop-up online event. We are thinking about how much male mental health is in the news right now and what a priority this is. And Jenny, you were saying to me, let's have a conversation. There's some things we need to talk about and an important story that you've been writing about, I guess, that you are going to bring to this session.
Yeah, absolutely. Clearly, suicide has been raised, and I have to say, I think very well handled and very sensitively handled. So, I mean, I'm pretty impressed with the way in which that's been managed. I think it's so important that we start to enable guys to feel okay about talking, because if we bottle up our emotions, I think we all know that we shouldn't bottle up our emotions, and we all know that sooner or later, if you do, something will come along and, we pop. So, in an ideal world, it would be fabulous if we all felt at ease about speaking and we all knew where to go to speak to someone safely. But so often that's not the case. And I'm writing another book, and a big book on this in this instance. It probably won't hit the shelves till sort of sometime at the end of next year. But one of the chapters is called Men Don't Cry. And it's actually the story of someone that I worked with over a period of time who came incredibly close, literally within seconds of taking his own life. And something happened to stop that. But I wanted to share his story because I just think there are so many lessons we can learn from it. I'm very grateful that he also has given me permission to do so. Ironically enough, the name that he and I chose for me to talk about is John, so I should just differentiate between John that I'm talking about, who I worked with, and you, who I have obviously had a few conversations with now. But I mean, does this feel an okay moment for me to share that story, John?
Yes, please, Jenny. Yes.
Okay. So this is a guy. It was very, very interesting. I had two sessions. I literally had two sessions cancelled in a row. Two phone calls, bang, bang, and then the phone rang, and there was a guy on the end of the phone saying, "Could I see you as soon as possible?" Now, I mean, you know yourself, that's very, very unusual. And I thought, well, I could see you tomorrow. So he came and was just crumbling, absolutely. He'd reached that sort of meltdown point. And his circumstances were about as challenging as I think anybody's could be. His wife and two children had been killed in a car crash, and he had. I mean, this was a few weeks before. I think 6, 7 weeks before. He'd got through the funeral. He'd done all what I would call. He'd gone into that immediate state of shock and trauma. I think we forget how traumatic loss is. I think in his instance we can relate to it.
Yes, incredibly traumatic loss.
Incredibly.
Incredibly, yeah.
But in reality, losses are actually quite traumatic, in fact, very. But he had become really, really isolated. He had tried to sort of visit his parents-in-law but he said every time he saw them, it just reminded him of his wife. And he said it was quite obvious that even though they were really lovely, he reminded them. So he kind of withdrew from them. His own family were very emotionally unavailable. His father's comment was, how quickly are you going to get back to work? Which was, I think designed to be supportive in some way, but really wasn't. Work were very kind and very good with him, but actually the company policy was to give people 1 day a year of compassionate leave. One day a
Okay.
year.
Not going to be
Um,
even nearly enough. Yeah. No.
not for anyone. And
Yeah.
and although they'd said take as much time as you want, I think in what I would call he had quite a high-powered job, and in quite a goal-orientated, kind of fast, busy, successful, professional world, because those were the rules, so to speak, he felt as though he was really like letting everyone down. It's like, even though they were really kind and said, take whatever time you want, it was like, so on all sides, he felt like he was failing. And he kind of started to get really withdrawn. And he said he caught himself in the mirror one day and just thought, I've got to do something. He wasn't eating, he wasn't washing. And he said he felt like his wife was sitting on one shoulder, sort of, saying, look, look at you, and he said, I realized how much she actually used to keep me on track in all kinds of ways that I'd never really appreciated. He said it was a very, very challenging for him to come and talk about any of this. But he set off into the village where he lived to kind of buy food. And he said people were crossing to the other side of the road to avoid him. And he said, I know, they just didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
But he just said it was so he said it was just too much. I couldn't handle the fact that people couldn't face me, and so how could I face myself, really? So he kind of went home and decided he would head to a supermarket, do a big shop. That in itself was loaded, because the day that the news had come, he'd stopped at a supermarket and bought flowers for his wife on the way home. And he said, walk into any supermarket, the first thing you see are flowers. And it was loaded with memories. He kind of got through it. He got to the checkout with a trolley full of, fresh food, frozen food. He was like, I've really, really got to do this. And he queued up. It was really busy, really packed. And he got to the point where he had to pay, and it was a cash-only till, and he didn't have any cash.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, completely understandable. We're not always fully available to life. I mean, it was a real ordeal for him to get around the supermarket. But the woman at the till made a really big deal of it. She rang her bell again and again and got on the tannoy. I mean, he said everybody knew, Mr. Stupid is here. And then she commiserated with the people behind him as if he wasn't even there.
Oh, that's tough, really tough. Yeah.
Big time tough. And he said, I snapped. I just couldn't do it. It was this complete breaking point. He just, the zilch energy, he'd run out. Everything he had to try and make that decision to move his life forwards just collapsed. And he just walked out, and he went to the pharmacy across the road and bought a variety of paracetamol and everything he could get. And I know you can't buy very much in one place, but actually you can just go to every corner shop en route on your way home, which is what he did. He bought alcohol, all sorts of stuff. So pretty much he made the decision that he didn't want to be there, and he was not going to hang around. He didn't want to live anymore. And he said, I don't think I was mad. I just couldn't see a way forwards.
Yeah.
And so he got home, and he said he prepped a bit. He sat at the dining room table, and he said for some reason, bizarrely, he waited until the evening. For some reason, he said, I don't know why, but it was important. So he was sitting and waiting, and he was literally all set to go. He'd lined everything up, and had just poured the first glass of whiskey that he was going to take. And there was a knock at the door, and he opened it, and there was a complete stranger standing there, a bloke he'd never seen before. And the bloke said, you don't know me, mate. I live up in the village, and I hear you're having a tough time. I'm just going up the road to watch the footy, and I wondered if you fancied a pint. And he got his coat, and he went. I think whenever I think of this story, I think, guardian angels come in all different shapes and sizes.
What an incredible moment.
Extraordinary moment, because I have absolutely no doubt, in having got to know him extremely well, that he would have gone through with that.
Yeah. He was serious that night.
He was serious, and nobody would have known. Nobody would have found him. That would have happened. And, here is this guy who just strolls down the road and knocks on the door. And he said going to the pub that night was one of the hardest things he's ever done, because he said, I knew everyone would be there from the village, people we knew, and it would be really hard, but at least we were going for a reason. And
Yeah.
so he
Yeah.
went, he watched the football, they had a couple of pints, they walked home, and he put everything away. That was, and in fact, the following morning he phoned me, it was literally,
Ah.
he said, I knew
Yeah.
I needed to do something and I needed to do more. But you know what was really curious? He said in the pub that night, I've never forgotten his words. He said, I caught a glimpse of the possibility that one day life might be normal again, you know, whatever normal is. And I've never forgotten that. It's like I caught a glimpse of possibility. And to me, you know, possibility and hope, you know, sit side by side.
Yeah.
And the other thing that he also voiced, which was, I thought, really something valuable to be mindful of, he said, we didn't talk about it. And I was really grateful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was an extraordinary moment of insight, I think, in the recognition that sometimes empathy isn't about talking, it's just about being.
Yeah.
You know, he in fact, I think it would have been really challenging if the guy had asked him to talk about it. Actually, he needed just to be.
Yeah.
And to be in the presence of someone and to know that someone cared, I think, to be connected to, as opposed to actually having that space to talk. I mean, I guess there's a lot of lessons we can learn from this story. And I suppose one lesson, I think, is exactly that sometimes people do need to speak,
Yeah.
and sometimes they don't. And that we need to make sure that if we are with someone and we know they've had a tough time, that the choice is theirs
Yeah. Yeah.
as to, you know, how much they say or not.
And maybe that also takes a bit of pressure off us too, Jenny. It's like sometimes we can feel the demand to do something. And actually, it's a wonderful example of how presence can just be what we need.
Yeah, just a connection to know that you're not alone, that somebody cares. You know, I mean, that without doubt, that man saved his life. There's no question of it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I'm always really moved when I think of that story. And as I said, it's a real story. These are real events. It also, just having someone reach out to him, I think, gave him permission to reach out himself. As I said, he picked up the phone the following day and he said, I know I need to do something about this. And the other thing I think was really, for me, was really another major learning curve in there is this, when we think about people crossing the street, and he completely understood that they didn't know what to say, but it also was having a real impact on that sense of isolation. And, you know, back to being able to have a voice. If we are around someone who's not okay, I think it's really also okay for us to say to someone, look, I'm out of my depth here. I don't really know what to say, even to say I'm not the greatest listener in the world. But, you know, if you need to talk, can I help you find the right person? Or just to let you know that I'm thinking of you. I don't really know what to say, I'm out of my depth, but we're thinking of you. You know, anything that isn't just an avoidance,
Yeah.
I think is pretty crucial.
Yeah, like some kind of contact and maybe some kind of help to get help.
Yes, yeah. Because I don't, we're not all equipped, you know, we're not all emotionally eloquent. Sometimes we're going through a tough time and we don't have the any resources to be available to support someone else.
Yeah.
But we could still actually voice that. We could sort of say, I'm so sorry. I don't have that in me at the moment, but I'm really thinking of you and can I help you? And, you know, it's just about that kind of authenticity. You know, we hear that word a lot. And, you know, authenticity really is about being real. It doesn't mean we're, in many ways, I think, if we're worried about something and we back away because we're worried, we create a sort of an isolation as opposed to actually still being able to connect with someone, but still maintain our own boundaries and look after ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really helpful way to think about, like, how can we not cross the street? How can we stay on our course and be helpful to the other person, even when we don't have a lot to offer? Because that's often the case for us, that we're struggling with what's going on for ourselves. It doesn't seem like there's much else, but just to know, like, how helpful a little piece of contact can be.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a big deal. It can just be, actually, I hear you having a tough time, thinking of you.
Yeah.
It's something, isn't it? It's the making of that connection, because I think isolation is a big contributing factor to many people's sort of, I guess it compounds difficulties. If we're not okay and we don't feel we can speak and we don't know where to go, or we feel as though we can be surrounded by people and be utterly isolated if we are not connecting to anyone.
Yeah. Well, now I'm thinking about, I guess the lady who was operating the till was maybe a little maxed out in her own
Yeah,
experience too, and
I
had a big
know.
reaction. And it also, I think, well, you're helping us see, Jenny, that we can make big assumptions that actually the person in front of us is okay, and maybe even that's something for men. Bigger body structures, perhaps can have that front that everything's fine, but to also take a moment and wonder, how is that person? Do they need a little a free pass from us today? We're interviewing Heather Criswell earlier this week, and she was saying maybe just someone just needs a free pass today, and because we don't know what they're living with.
No, it's really true. And actually, interestingly enough, with her, I think that swings both ways. Because I actually, when he first told me that story, when he told me what had happened, I felt really angry with her.
Yeah, I can understand that.
I understand that.
Yes,
But
yes.
and it was a really strong reaction. But I guess again, because I'm accustomed to listening to myself,
Mm,
it's quite an important part of our work when we listen to
mm,
others. And I think it would be so easy to judge her. And of course, the reality is, she could have, be on a final written warning because she'd
yeah,
let someone go through a cash only till the day before and there'd been some
yeah,
problem or something. We don't know. It could have been her first day back at work after, I don't know, some member of her family had passed away, or we don't know what her circumstances are. It could just be that she's not terribly, there are people in the world who don't always treat others with kindness.
mm,
I guess we don't know. The lesson here is, well, I guess there's a multitude of lessons. Is one, I guess we don't know her circumstances. She certainly didn't know his. And there are no circumstances in which, if you are feeling acutely vulnerable, that you should feel you have to walk around with a t-shirt on saying, I'm in a really bad way.
yeah,
We need to
yeah,
be very, very mindful of having that choice as to who we talk to and how much we share. Because if we sometimes say too much when we're vulnerable, it can leave us feeling really overexposed. And I'm very mindful of that in the early days of working with people who've experienced a lot, of taking that slowly. And also, if we do have, say, a counseling session where they reveal a lot, I will actually say to them, almost like in preparation, when you go home, you may feel quite vulnerable, you may feel quite exposed, because this is how we feel after we've spoken. And just the awareness of that takes the edge off that. It's that sort of recognition that actually I'm feeling really exposed. That doesn't mean I shouldn't have talked. It just means that I have talked, and Jenny said this would happen, so that's okay. Because actually that is what happens to us. So, as I said, going back to the supermarket again, I'm slightly digressing, but there's something very important about, as you said, recognizing we don't know what anyone else is going through.
yeah,
And I think you raised a really important point, that men are often brought up not to show their feelings.
yeah,
And they're really, really adept at covering that up, which means that we don't necessarily connect to them or recognize that they're having a tough time unless we really know about it. And it's so easy to brush them aside, or somebody might even be quite grumpy or abrupt or not very connected when we talk to them. That might be because they are really struggling. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're trying to be rude or difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, yeah, we're maybe as men, that's a huge generalization, but more likely to be grumpy and maybe even a little bit aggressive than tearful, I guess. So, yeah, yeah.
Which sadly is part of the culture. It's been really interesting. I've been talking to men about their emotions over the last sort of week, actually, and it's been really interesting that pretty much across the board, every guy has said that they don't live in a world where it's kind of like, even though they know that they should be able to speak about their feelings, there are so many contradictory messages that say it's not okay, and that they've learned not to, or that emotions are weak. They're seen as a weakness rather than a strength. So I think for guys, I mean, we are making quite generalized statements,
Yeah, yeah.
but I do think that culturally this is quite kind of prevalent, actually, really.
Yeah, yeah, and as you were saying at the beginning of our discussion, that it's coming to our attention in our culture. I guess we see it in the suicide rates in our country. I guess mental health across the board, but including amongst men, is really in crisis. So
Absolutely, it really is, and I think the more that we can, recognize that and look at what we need to do to elevate people's well-being, and I guess you and I could both get on a soapbox about emotional literacy and emotional health and emotional awareness, but I think we both know from first-hand experience, I think both in our working practice and personally, that it makes a massive difference to our ability, I think, to navigate, I'm going to say, life's challenges. And interestingly enough, John, the person I was speaking about, I kind of want to kind of conclude, actually. I mean, I suppose there's a couple of maybe things to conclude with. I mean, one is just really a big message on kindness. I kind of would like to put that across, because if we approach everyone with kindness and compassion and care, irrespective of anything, then, because we don't know what they're going through, actually, we could be the maker or breaker of someone's life. And we may never know. We could create a turning point in someone's life just through an act of kindness, without ever knowing that that's made a difference. But actually just knowing that we approach our lives in that way, I think is a really valuable thing to consider. But as I said, to finally conclude, I really want to just let everybody know, I saw John a long time ago, and we worked together for quite a while. He's now one of the most emotionally eloquent men probably that I have met. So he can sit alongside you, I think, as a role model for guys in learning to speak about their emotions. And he actually did eventually remarry. He met someone new. He came back to see me, actually, at that point, because he felt quite emotionally challenged. All the things that happen if we've lost a life partner, and then later on we meet a new person, we often feel guilty, like we're letting them down or that we shouldn't. And the great thing was, he didn't hesitate to pick up the phone and say, I've got this stuff going on, I really value a space to talk about it. So he didn't come in crisis, he came in awareness. And then later on, he has 2 children with his new wife. They have 2 gorgeous children. And again, he came back to see me when they were expecting the first. Just again, some underlying rumblings of anxiety, and just wanted it. It's like prevention rather than cure. Because of his awareness, he really approaches his life very differently. And when his second child was born, he didn't come and see me. He just dropped me an email with some photographs, just to say, actually, I'm doing fine. I thought about coming, but actually I didn't feel I needed to. Which is kind of fabulous, isn't it? And you just think, this is somebody who now has that language. He's got that connectivity to himself and to all the people around him, and it's been so life-changing for him. And I hope that his story will be kind of inspirational, not only in giving all of us messages, but actually be helpful for anyone who is finding themselves hitting rock bottom and feeling isolated. It may be that people don't know how to connect with you, but really a big message is you're not alone, and there are people out there who do wish to help you and can help you.
Yeah, yeah, that really is a really hopeful thought to conclude on, Jenny. I really appreciate John, I guess, for allowing you to talk about his story, to write about his story, and just give us a sense that like he's living with a lot of tragedy and also living a life full of love and courage as well. Really
Absolutely,
hopeful.
absolutely. And I think, that courage is there because of his capacity to feel his emotions. It's interesting actually that connectivity to his emotions is actually the core of that sense of internal courage. I think when we can do, emotions, going back to emotions being a weakness, absolutely not. If you are able to be attuned and connected to your emotions, they become the source of your strength.
Yeah. Well, thank you to you too, Jenny, for really bringing us John's story, the lessons that we can learn from that, and connecting that to what is in all of our minds just now around male mental health and suicide and thriving as human beings. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for, engaging in such a spontaneous conversation. It seemed so relevant, and I know you and I like to kind of embrace these things when the time is right. So, thank you very much for having me.
Oh, thank you too, Jenny. Till the next time we'll speak, we'll say
Indeed.
goodbye for now. Bye bye.
Goodbye.